Morning everybody. We are ready to have a look at the planning of an STI application that uses a class to create and process an object. We had a good look at the theory regarding it. So now we're going to see which parts are necessary. So first of all, if you go and download the new planning document, that makes provision for classes. It looks a little bit different and hopefully it's really user friendly. So first of all, there's a space for member variables that we can fill in, and then one block provided for constructors of methods or methods. So for every method constructor, anything that you need, copy that method. So if you had to have two constructors, first, second constructor, two methods, and let's say Tostring method, you're going to copy that section of code 4 times so that you've got 5 different units where you can enter the different method information. Then, if we scroll down, I've got a place where we can enter the shared data for the formal forms. Normally this would be done at module level, and you will just include the name of the module over here. For any functional procedure that you need to code in the application itself, there's a space provided, and we're a little bit advanced now, so parameter names, local variables, whatever data is returned, and you tell me what module shared data you're going to use. And then there's a section provided for any event that you need, button click, a menu item click, form load. So for any event that you need, you're going to simply take this and make a copy. So for the number of events that you need, copy for each different event. That's the first thing that we need. If we then go have a look at an example, I want to take program 46. It's available on Vutela. I've included the class diagrams for you in a separate document. Over here it's the class diagram for this specific program. So the class diagram would be something like a summary. I would always give you a description as well. Take note, in the class diagram we only specify the methods that you need to code that's going to do some job for us regarding the class. You always need constructors as well, normally a default constructor and one that gets the parameter data, and then you need a Tostring method as well. Okay, so member variables are specified and the important methods, but there's always some methods that you need to add. So I would need to most probably provide 5 methods, 2 constructors, they are special methods, a buy goods method, a pay account method, and then a Tostring method. So if we can have a look first of all at the class then. I've already filled in the data for us. Just save a little bit of time, and I'm going to tell you exactly what we need. So for each member variable, we need to specify the name, and have a good look. Names of member variables in Visual Basic will be an underscore and a lowercase start of the name. So underscore name, underscore ID number, underscore balance for the 3 member variables. The types would be string, string, and decimal. ID number, although the word says number, normally only things that we do calculations with. So this multiplied with that. We're going to specify as integer or double or something like that. So if I've got an employee number, an ID number, even your student number, it's saved as a string in the database. The access for all member variables would always be private. For each member variable, we'll need to provide a property with a get and a set section for now. The get section would be used to access the data, and the set section would be used to change the data. And the set section would very often need a validation. And these validations are specified for us. Check that the ID number is 13 characters long. So what would be the validation? The length must be 13 characters. The balance must be a positive 0 or bigger number. So that's the first thing that we fill in. So this part is rather easy. Do remember the naming format is really, really strict now. It's got to be underscore and then the name. The underscore tells me the access is private. How do I know the access is private? We can have a look at the class diagram. First of all, there's a minus just before name, ID number and balance. And then second of all, the theory tells us we're always going to keep the member variables private. Next, I would need a default constructor. And we're just going to assign initial values, very importantly, to the properties. So we'll show you how to code this in VB, the properties. But for now, just initial data to the properties. I will need to provide a parameterized constructor. It says here, get the initial ID and initial name and ID number and assign 0 to the balance. So which parameters must it get? It gets the name and the ID number. Constructors never return data. It's going to update the properties, name, ID number, and balance. And take note, whenever we talk about a property, very definitely always uppercase now. So this is the first really important thing regarding classes. So member variables specified with a lowercase and an underscore before the name. So underscore name, the property for this would be called capital N name. Okay, just like it's written over here. So the properties that I'm going to update, I specify for the default constructor as well as for the overloaded constructor. And these doesn't need any local variables. You can leave it blank or write none. I only need the English steps. So assign the parameters to the properties and we need to assign 0 to the balance. If I can have a look at the buy goods method, let's just change the naming there. I need that gone. Okay, so if I have a look at the description for buy goods, it says provide a buy goods method that's called when a client buys on account. The amount is sent as a parameter. We can see that in the diagram as well. Validate that the parameter amount is positive before adding it to the balance. If a validation fails, ignore that processing for now. Okay. So what do we need to do? I've got to code a procedure because it's only going to do some work for me. If I have a look at the class diagram, these two methods doesn't return any data. They're just going to do a job for me. So these needs to be procedures. So name is procedure by goods, whereas I can specify the previous ones were the default constructor and the parameterized constructor. What parameter must it receive? Amount. Again, exactly the same as what is specified over there. Now the case doesn't matter too much. Microsoft goes and capitalize everything for us. This one doesn't return data. We're going to update which property, because that's the real purpose of the methods. We're normally going to update some data, or we can just calculate something like the calculate area method of the rectangle class. But over here I need to update a property. Which one? The balance. I don't really need any local variables. So the steps: declare the variables, test that the amount is positive. If it's positive, add the amount to the balance. And my code's going to look like this. I've got the parameter amount, test that it's positive. If so, add it to the balance. And this balance will now be my property. So really important, this one must be coded uppercase. If we can have a look at the pay account method, first of all the description. Provide a pay account method that's called when a client buys an amount on his account. The amount is sent as a parameter. Validate that the parameter amount is positive before subtracting. Remember, somebody pays now, so that amount goes off from the balance before subtracting it from the balance. Again, if a validation fails, don't do anything. Just test that it's positive. So, pay account will again be a procedure. I get amount as a parameter. I don't return any data. It's going to update the balance, and I don't need local variables. Steps would be declare the variables, test that the amount is positive, subtract the amount from the balance, and end if. And again, these would need to be my properties. So, very important that we write these in capitals when we go write the VB steps. Lastly, I will need to code this would be a function. Tostring is always a function. It's going to return data for us. String data. It's not going to update any properties, and I don't need any local variables, and it doesn't get any parameters. It's just going to return a string with all the property values for us. Okay, so what important things do we have here? First of all, the member variables. The names must be underscore lowercase. Name, this first character must be lowercase. Balance over there. This tells any other programmer. So this is a standard that's used all across the world. It tells any other programmer looking at your code that these member variables would have private access. And normally all member variables would have private access. Each member variable will have its own get and set property. About in 90% of the cases we're going to provide both get and set. Sometimes when we get to the more advanced code, I would, for example, not provide a set property, but we're going to have a look at that when the time is there. So for now, all properties. We specify which validation. The exact property name in VB will then be this name, just capitalized. So the member variable, let's just open up another. So if a member variable is called surname, the property is always called surname. If a member variable is called pet owner, then the property is always called pet owner. Over here, my member variable will called name, so the property is always called name. This property would have two sections then, a set and a get section. So if the member variable is called ID number, my property would always be called ID number. And we've got balance then. Property is called balance. So really important that you stick to these names. If we can have a look at the program itself, then we all have the description, single document interface for now, input group box with name and ID number. We're going to use text boxes and a save button. A client group box, it contains a list box and the user can't type anything into the list box. And then a menu with file and client options. File must have a sub option exit, and client must have options buy on account, pay on account. And the client menu must initially be disabled. Actually, we should say the client menu, because the user mustn't be able to enter any data. We'll see in a moment how that looks. So I will provide a save button. We can design our own screen as we need it. Save button where the user will need to get a name and an ID. Let's just put that in the right order. We create the client object. We're going to display the data neatly in the list box and then enable the client menu and clear the input controls. Buy on account, we'll get an amount, call a method for the object and display the updated data. And then we've got pay on account, that again would get the amount of the transaction, call the method and display the updated data for the user. So if I can have a look at the planning, then the first important thing, so this application only uses one client at a time, only makes provision for one. I would be able to create a client object, and then that one person can buy on account and pay off his account in my program. Later on we're going to be able to use multiple objects, but not now. So object client, I'm going to specify that in my module, and I'm going to always start obj to specify I've got an object of the type client. My class is called client. Okay, it would have public access in the module so that the other forms can use it, but it won't have any initial value. The object will only be created when button save is clicked. Whenever we need to go and display some data, it's really a nice idea to code a procedure for that. So procedure show client will just display the data of the client neatly. And now wherever we need to go and display it, we can call procedure show client. I've got button save that will save a client for me, an object. So the steps in English would be declare the variables, get the name and the ID number from text box controls, create the object. This is the important part. In VB this would, I will create a new object and I will specify the input name and ID. And now to display the client data, I can call my procedure. And then I will just enable the menu options and clear the input controls. If the client buys on account, so that's in Form 1, it's a menu item click, and that would be the name. Remember the rules for calling or naming menus. So in English, we would have a few steps, but let's have a look at the variables first. Maybe I forgot to include it over here. So what input would this section of code needs? Needs the ID number and the name. From which controls? Text box, ID number, and text box, name. It's going to list all output in a list box. And I don't need any local variables apart from those two that I've already specified. And my programming code will use object client. So if I go to buy an account, I will need a name in amount as input from an input box. In the list box, I will display all the data. So user control can either be for input or output. The amount I'm going to get from input box and all output would be displayed in the list box. And again, I'm going to use object client. I will declare the variables. I will get an amount. We know now from the input box. We call the buy goods method for the object. So that's how the VB statement would look. And then we're going to display the data. Again, we can call show client, the procedure that we're going to code. Almost exactly the same processing for when a client pays on account, except that we're going to use the pay account method now for the client. Okay, next we need to go and have a look at some data, some test data. Okay, this is the data I want you to save. So an object is going to have 3 member variables, and right at the start there would be no data at all for them. The user will need to call button save, and let's say the user gets Sue and some ID number. Year 2000, let's go for Christmas Day. Something like that. When the object is created, then we're going to store Sue and this ID number. So let's just go and copy that. And the balance would be 0. Thereafter, if the user buys on account, so menu client, just go get the name of that menu correctly. If the user comes in, buy on account. Let's say for an amount of 1,000 Rand. What's going to happen? The balance must change to 1,000. Let's say the user comes again and the client buys on account for another amount. Then the balance will change to 1,500. Let's assume the client now comes and pays some money on his account. Let's go and say for an amount of 600. Then the balance changed to 900. If the client comes and buy now again, let's say for an amount of 200, then the balance changed to 1,100. So we need to specify a few transactions that happens. If the client, for example, will come and pay on account again, let's say pays 400 Rand on his account, then the balance will change from 1,100 to 700 Rand. Okay? We need to specify what the data will be after a few transactions is done for the client. So few times that data is sent via the methods to the object. So specify that the object is created, we've got the data, and then every time the transactions will change the actual value stored for the client. Okay, as an optional extra, I'm next going to code the whole VB application from the planning for you. So first of all would be the user interface. And I imagine the following one. There's an input group box with name and ID number, as was specified, together with the save button. A client group box with a list box. Client would have two options, the menu, buy on account, pay on account, and I've got a file, exit option. So user interface as we imagine it. And for now we've got a single document interface, so one form where everything happens. Next we're going to add the class to the form. So right click on the project, choose add, and you can choose class or you can choose new item. Then you just need to click choose class there. We're going to give the class the precise name that it needs to, client. We're always going to switch on the options. And next we need to go and add all the things that we need to. Now there's a real nice and easy way to add a member variable and the properties for it all at once. If you type prop and press tab and tab again, all the things that we need regarding a property is specified. So first of all we need the name of the property. That would be name, the type is string. If I press tab, all the right values are already changed. I will leave the type as string. The name of the property must be name. If I press tab, all is done. So let's go and add the second property. Property, tab, tab. And now I need ID number. The ID number will also be a string. the property will be ID number like this, and it's done. Last property that I need, prop tab will be the balance. Okay, so have a look. First of all, I fill in the private member variable, balance. Tab, now the data type. And this must be decimal, hey? We've got money. The actual name of the property, if I press tab again, must be balance. And decimal is already updated. I literally just need to click after it. So, every member variable and its properties forms a unit by typing prop and then press tab again. VB is going to assist me in inserting the code. I need to first of all change the name of the private member variable. Then I will press tab to go change the data type. I will press tab to change the name of the property. Remember, name of the property must always be uppercase, and the data type would automatically be changed. Every property has got a get and a set section by default. Get will just send back the member variable value. This is automatically inserted for you. Set will update the data for me. I need to though add the validations. So if I go back to my planning document, we said we've got a validation for name. The length must be bigger or equal to 3. If I go add that, I need to add the validations always in the set section. I'm going to do it as follows. This set section gets the new value as a value parameter, and it's always called value. So I can check if value.length would be bigger or equal to 3, then all is good, and I want to assign my data. I'm not going to do anything at this stage if that validation failed. I need to add the same over here. So if value.length, what was my validation? The length must be 13 characters, and I need an end if. Balance, we had a validation, it's got to be positive, so always go for bigger or equal to 0 for now. So here I'm going to type if value, my name of my parameter, is bigger or equal to 0, then, and if I need to just add that code to within the if statement to form my validation. We're not going to include else at this stage. We're not going to do anything if the validations failed. So in exactly this manner, we're going to add all the member variables and properties that's necessary in the code. Next, in my planning document, I've got the different constructors. So first of all, the default constructor. It would be a public constructor, and the constructors are always called new. And the default constructor doesn't have any parameters. It's got to have this name. And all that I will have to do is to take the property values, have a look. It's this name capitalized, so that means it's the properties that we are using, and we're going to assign the default values to them. So this must get none. The ID number must get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And the balance must be 0. If I go code the second constructor, the parameterized constructor, I need 2 parameters, name and ID number. I'm going to assign the parameters to the properties and assign 0 to the balance. I do it as follows. So again, public sub new, but now I need the parameters. So these are always by value. You can call it initial name, or we can call it parameter name. Parameter is just a little bit quicker. This should be a string, and I've got those 2. And now I need to assign that data to the properties. So ID number, and then what must happen to my balance? Balance must be 0. Take note, I'm only using the properties always. It's a good idea if you don't go and call these parameters exactly the same, only for the default constructor. Call it parameter name and parameter ID number, so that we know exactly what we're assigning where. Okay, so parameter ID number, oh boy, that would give me a problem. That must be name. So take the parameter, assign to the name. Take the parameter ID number, assign to the ID number. And 0 must go to the balance. So now I need to go and code a procedure by goods. It must get an amount. And I've got most of the statements already. So line open again, public sub by account. Thought I copied that name. By goods. Gets a parameter. I don't have any local variables to declare. I can simply go and add my VB statements. And I'm going to do it the quick way. I've already coded it. So test that the amount is bigger or equal to 0. Assign that to the balance. And in exactly the same manner, I've got public pay account that gets an amount. And this one must do exactly the same things, except if the amount is positive, I need to, this time around, subtract it from the balance because somebody paid off on his account. Last method that I need would be the Tostring method. We code it as follows. Start with public, and this we're going to override. So this says recode the method. And that's what overrides means. method must be called toString. If I do that, all the right things are already added. I'm simply going to return the name, followed by a comma, followed by the ID number, and have a look, we're using the properties everywhere, followed by the balance. Okay, exactly like it is specified over here. The balance we can specify up to 2 decimal positions, but normally we're not going to include the currency format. Just 500.00 numeric values like this. This is then how we would code the class. If I go over it again, every member variable and its property is coded. Member variable underscore with a name, property with an uppercase name. And only in the properties are we using the member variable values. Rest of the class we're always using the properties. I've included some validations, and we include those in the set properties always. So only if the value is bigger than or equal to 3 characters do we assign it to the actual member variable value. Same for the ID, it must be 13 characters long, and the balance must be a positive value. I code the default constructor. Here I just assign starting values to all the properties. And we code the parameterized constructor. It gets certain values via parameters and assign those to the properties again. Sometimes we've got initial values that we are assigning. I can code as many constructors as I need to for a class. We're going to code a buy goods. This must be a procedure. It gets an amount. Test that the amount is good, then update the balance. And again, a pay account procedure, a method for us, gets an amount, test that the amount is good, update the balance for us. And lastly, we need to override the toString method. toString will simply return all the data of the class separated by commas. Okay, now we're good. We're ready to go have a look at the rest of the application. So first of all, I will next go and add a new module to store my data. I'm always going to call my modules module data, so that I know this would be the module to store the data, and we're always going to switch on the options. So over here I've got it in the planning. I want to remember an object variable. It's a variable of the type object. I'm going to call it object client always, and the type would be client. I specify it as follows: public object client as client. There we go. That's all that I need over here. Take note, I don't create an object. It's not as new client, it's just as client. If I now go to the form, as soon as somebody clicks on the save button, I want to do the processing specified already. We just want to use a procedure, so I'm going to code that procedure first. So it's got to be procedure, show client, inform 1. So this would only be used in this procedure. So I'm going to call it private sub show client. And all the different statements that I've already specified would be included there. And have a look. Now I'm going to display data to the user. I thus need nice formatting. Let's just go make sure that my list box is named properly. It is not yet. List output. And there all is good. Okay, so button save. Always a good idea to go and tell everybody else what you're going to do first with a comment just before the method. And now I can go have a look at the different statements. The name and ID number as string. These are local variables. Declare them. I need to get the data. So name is equal to txt name.text. This would be the get part of the property that's used. And then I need to get the ID number as well. I need to get the name and the ID number from the user. Next, create the object. So object client, new client, and we're going to send the name and the ID number to the constructor. I need to use the names of the variables that I've defined over here. Then I want to display the client data, so I can call procedure show client. I'm going to talk about the menus just now and why it's necessary. And lastly, I can clear the text box control, so txt name, txt ID number, I can clear that like this. So if I run my application for now, have a look. We can enter Sue with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 values for the ID number. If I click save, data is saved and it's displayed for me. I didn't code any buy an account or pay account options yet. Take note, I don't want the user to buy on account or pay on account initially before the object is created. So I would normally do the following. Choose the client option and then in the properties make that option disabled. So change enabled to false. If I now run the program, nobody can choose the client option. They can choose file exit, they can choose save. And that's how I need it. Right at the start, before any data is saved for my client, I can't go buy on account or pay on account. So that's when, soon as the data is saved correctly, I can change my menu. It's just not called correctly right at the start, so I change the name. It's got to be called menu client, proper name for it. dot enabled will be true, like that. If I now go to the buy on account menu option, then we've already specified that I need to get an amount from the user and then call the different menu options. So dim amount as decimal. I'm going to get the amount from the input box. And immediately it mounts at me. It wants me to convert it to a decimal. That's fine. And have a look. Moment that I call object client now, I can go and call the method that I need. So buy on goods, and I need an amount, it says, as a parameter. When I'm done, I can call the show client method, and maybe I can just I like to add a confirmation to say buy on account transaction successful for amount, and let's go and add the amount like that. Whenever I'm talking to the user, always like that. I just want to clear this list box right at the start, because we're now going to display the client data multiple times. So if I were to run my program, I've got Sue with ID 20001225, something like that. Saves it. If I go buy on account for 1,000 Rand, I've got 1,000 Rand. We can increase the size of the list box. If I go buy on account again, 200 Rand, the balance is increased. If I go buy again for 10 Rand, balance is increased. As soon as we're done with everything, we will check that the data corresponds with our output. If I go have a look at the pay on account, my transaction is really a lot the same, so I'm going to copy some code, but this must be called pay on account with the amount. So pay account transaction was successful for amount, and the amount is displayed. Let's just go and update my form so that my data is displayed correctly or neatly to the user. If I run this program now, we can add the Excel data in the background. So if I go to Sue and year 2000, 1225, create, Oh, so ID number was wrong, so nothing happened with the ID. If I now go buy an account for R1,000, like we said over here, and then buy an account again for R500, and now pay account 600, and then buy on account again for 200, and then pay account for 400, 700, and is the balance. The balance is as we said it would be. Okay, so there's quite a few steps. Have a look at the video slowly, carefully, again at sections where you need it. Hope this assists. Thank you.